"I see," said the vampire thoughtfully, and slowly he walked across the room towards the window. For a long time he stood there against the dim light from Divisadero Street and the passing beams of traffic. The boy could see the furnishings more clearly now. The round oak table, the chairs. A wash basin hung on one wall with a mirror. He set his briefcase on the table and waited. "But how much tape do you have with you?" asked the vampire, turning now so the boy could see his profile. "Enough for the story of a life?" That was the opening lines from Anne Rice's seminal masterwork, Interview with the Vampire, published in 1976. As those of you who saw my 2022 reading plans end of the year book tag video, I was already in the middle of reading this with some friends, and I wasn't planning to do a standalone review of it. But then, as I was close to finishing up the book, I received the unfortunate news that Anne Rice passed at the age of 80 from complications from a stroke. And I just felt, you know, I enjoyed this book so much, and she gave so much to the world of literature that I just felt it necessary to talk about it for a little while. I have a sort of an interesting history with this book because this is my second time reading it. I read it for the first time in 2015, somewhere around there, either summer or autumn. I can't remember. I'll put it up. But I read it before, and I came to this book very late. I was very familiar with the 1994 adaptation by Neil Jordan, and I loved that movie. That was what got me interested in the book. But at the time, I found the book very stolid and monotonous and sort of one note. And I don't know why, because on this reread I loved it. I think maybe I was just comparing it too much to the movie at the time. It was too fresh in my mind, and I didn't have an appreciation for some of the things that this book does that I do now. So, you know, as always, I was just a different person back then, as we all were. So some books are like lightning in a bottle. Some books are once in a lifetime, once in a generation, things that not only were popular and massively appreciated, referenced over and over again, but they also go on to become an integral part of the culture, to basically be the Bible from how we interpret these genres. And Interview with a Vampire, in my opinion, is one of those books. Obviously, the elements of it had been around for a long, long time. You know, vampires, that sort of existential ennui, gothic literature, all these elements. These elements obviously had all existed before, especially, you know, from Bram Stoker's novel Dracula, which I'm embarrassed to say that I still haven't read. I'm sorry, Michael K. Vaughan. I want to get to it, but so all these elements had existed before, but Anne Rice brought them together in a way that is so genius, so inventive, so beautifully written that when reading it now, as you know, in the modern age, it's almost like a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason. Anybody who knows me, I'm a sucker for pretty words. I love just a beautiful writing style. I love writing that's just pleasant to read, and this has that in spades. I mean, the thing is, like, this book is not very plot driven. Obviously, it's very sort of philosophical, very introspective. But the thing about it is that it's just so beautifully written that, like, I could have read about, I don't know, watching paint dry. I couldn't have watched paint dry. I could have read about somebody watching paint dry, and I would have been, like, enthralled. Obviously, it's very lush, very poetic, very sort of purpley, some might say, overheated, but I love it. I loved that about it. And it fits with the very sort of intentionally archaic style of the book, where the narrator, Louis, who is the titular vampire who is being interviewed, is, you know, this old New Orleans Frenchman from, you know, the 18th century. So it sort of has that similar structure of sort of an 19th, 18th century novel, with sort of, you know, where it's very full of philosophical digressions, and it's very insular and that kind of thing. So I think that made it work really, really well. And and the thing that Anne Rice did that I think that nobody else had done before, or at least not in this way, was that she made the vampire modern, I guess is the best way I can put it. Obviously, they're still very classic vampires, sunlight and things like that will kill them, stakes in the heart, that kind of stuff. But there had never, at least to my knowledge, there had never been a story like this where the vampire was dealt with not only sympathetically, or not sympathetically, but dealt with as sort of a three-dimensional living, breathing person, where it feels like somebody actually sat down and thought what it would be like to be a vampire, to be immortal, to last throughout the ages. And she captures that beautifully in this book. There's a bit where Louis is speaking with another character who tells him that he's the vampire for the age, that he wants to be with him because he feels that instead of being stuck in one sort of wavelength as a lot of other vampires are, he kind of grew into the 19th century, which I thought was a really interesting sort of a comment on Anne Rice's part about sort of the time period, because obviously the 19th century was, that was like the Romantic era and all that stuff, with all these lush sort of poets writing these very highly wrought, emotional, insular things, lots of philosophical works. It's like it feels like one of those like 18th century sort of philosophical novels, like Thomas Mann type thing, but written about a vampire, and that's what's so fascinating about it. And I think that's why it works so well, and why it continues to be a bestseller and to be so enormously influential. As I said, while all of these elements might have existed before, Anne Rice brought them together in a way that felt so seamless and so brilliant, and it just made so much sense, and it worked so well that you just wondered why nobody else thought of it. the thing about that, of course, being that it is a very existential, very philosophical book. It's not very plot heavy. So I imagine a lot of people who might be looking for like hardcore, like violent, bloody vampire action probably wouldn't be satisfied with this. And that's nothing wrong with that. I love bloody vampire stuff, when it's good, but this just, to me, it was just so great. And obviously because of the subject matter, and because she delves into these things from such a deeply psychological angle, in my mind, that makes it more disturbing than if it was just vampire blood and guts everywhere. Because they actually think about and deal with the fact that in order to survive, they have to kill, and what does that mean? Like are they evil? There's just so many so many things in this book, and I think the reason a lot of these like sort of feelings of like philosophical ennui were captured so well was that this was written shortly after Anne Rice suffered an unfortunate tragedy where her 5-year-old daughter died. And so I think because of that temperament while she was writing it, it's just suffused with just grief and loss and depression and sadness, and because of that, it can be a little tough sometimes, for multiple reasons. Like some people might see it as monotonous, which I didn't, because they felt very real and lived in to me. But also, like, if you're susceptible to books with sad characters being sad, then that would be difficult as well. So it can be a bit of a tough read at times because of that. It's kind of unrelenting like that, which is why I was getting through it quickly, but it took me a while to actually finish because it was just so, as I said, kind of relentless like that. But I didn't see that as a bad thing. Whereas the first time around, I found it slow and plodding. The second time around, like, I was just fascinated every page. I was with it, And the other thing that's so unique about this book, I think, is the character of Lestat. Who went on to become even more famous than the narrator of this book, Louis. Lestat is one of those lightning in a bottle characters that is just she just there had never been a vampire like that before, because I've heard this comparison before, but the thing about Lestat that is so interesting is that he's a vampire that accepts that he's a vampire, that loves the fact that he's a vampire, that savors it. Whereas, like, a lot of the vampires in this book, for example, like Louis and Armand, they spend a lot of time, kind of moping and being very philosophical. Lestat is kind of like, bully to all that, and screw that. I'm gonna be a libertine and feed off of beautiful men and women every night. And he's very, like, hedonistic. A character like that had never really been captured before. Sort of an anti-hero, that anti-heroic quality of a monster who knows he's a monster and kind of accepts it and has personality and is suave. But at the same time, as I said, there's more to him as well. He's desperately lonely. He clings to companionship. He's a magnificently extra dramatic, chaotic bi energy. Actually, there was a scene in this book. Lestat was, like, upset about something, and he just starts banging pots and pans like instruments, just because I can. And it's just very, drama queen, like, extra stuff like that. So he has personality, and I think that was one of the many successes of this book, was that Lestat was such an arresting character, and he was interesting. And also with the character of Claudia, who is the perpetually 5-year-old vampire. There's so much to her too, because she's this young child. She's this picture of innocence, but she's also this horribly violent, creature who unlike Louis, enjoys feeding from people. So it's like that contrast, but she has depth too. She's not just a killing machine. She feels things strongly. That's the thing about this book, is that people are feeling things very strongly. So if you don't like that, you probably wouldn't like this. But I thought it was done so well. As you can tell, I'm rambling about it because I liked it so much. And one of the things that also works really well about this book is the relationship between all those three characters, Lestat, Louis, and Claudia. They become almost like this twisted father and daughter family, and it's so. Just the interpersonal drama between them is just, I was just hooked. It's just great. It's just fun to read. And of course, the other prominent thing that I wanted to talk about with this book is it's very, 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 very queer. Obviously, this was 1976. It's sort of written to echo a time where, like, homosexuality wasn't really acknowledged openly. So, like, nobody in the book, says anything. Nobody mentions being gay or bisexual or anything like that. Nobody mentions queer identity. But most of the major relationships in this book are between men, like Lestat and Louis, and they are incredibly, incredibly passionate. And it basically is described as, full on, like, emotional, love. It's very, I think that was very ballsy of Anne Rice to, especially in 1976, to touch on those themes, the homoerotic themes so boldly for the time. Actually, what surprised me on this reread was that there are moments where it is very, very sexual. Like, there's a scene where Louis feeds from a willing young boy, and the boy, like, gets an erection, and he, like, presses himself against Louis as he, like, picks him up as he's feeding from him. It's intensely sexual, and that shocked me because I didn't remember that at all from my last read, my first read. But again, I just thought that was so amazing and, like, ballsy for her to do that for the time, and just to openly have these men who are not, traditionally masculine, who are very, very, very soft spoken and very, and who aren't afraid to feel things strongly and to cry and to care so deeply about another man that you would devote yourself to him. There's so many things about this book that make it special. I've rambled on for so long. I just loved it. If you haven't read it, if somehow I mean, I know there's people out there who haven't read this, people way older than me who haven't read this. But if you like vampires and you haven't read this, you have to. I mean, it's up there with Dracula in terms of influence. I mean, it's required reading. There was never a book like this before. Like as I said, lightning in a bottle. Since I enjoyed this so much, I'm really looking forward to eventually getting to the sequels. And when I get to them, maybe I'll post a review. Maybe I won't. We'll see how I feel. And I also stocked up on a bunch of other Anne Rice stuff, as I've shown in some of my book hauls. I have The Witching Hour and a few of her other books. So I have a lot of Anne Rice to get to, which is good because I really, really liked this. Yeah, so I just wanted to highlight, like this classic novel from a legend who's sadly no longer with us, and I just wanted to say, rest in peace, Anne Rice. You're one of a kind. So yeah, that's my review of Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. And if you've read this book, what did you think of it? Have you read any of Anne Rice's other books? Did you like them? Get a dialogue going, and like and subscribe and all that. So this has been Bartel's Bookshelf, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.